They thought the end of my marriage was my ruin, when in truth, it was their undoing. Daniel pressed his signature onto the divorce papers, his family bursting into smug laughter. Each laugh was a knife meant to slice away my worth, to remind me I did not belong in their world. The judge's voice rose above the noise. "Mrs. Ellis, please state your assets for the record." I lifted my chin, steady. "My father is Victor Ellis. He owns Ellis Healthcare and Real Estate." The air shifted, laughter stopped. A pen dropped, echoing in silence. Margaret's smile froze, Daniel's grip trembled. Their confidence dissolved in a single breath. In that instant, I was no longer the woman they mocked. I was the woman who would shatter the story they built about me. And this was only the beginning. The smell of onions and garlic filled a small kitchen in New Orleans. I was only 8, standing on a chair, stirring a pot while my grandmother, Clara, worked beside me. She wiped sweat from her brow, apron stained from hours of labor. We weren't cooking for ourselves. We were cooking for another family, one that could afford to pay her for meals she would never eat. She looked at me, eyes sharp but kind. "Naomi," she said, "a black girl must learn to stand tall, even when the world tries to bend her low." Her words were heavy, but I held on to them. I remember the sound of pots clanging, the heat of the stove, the way her hands never stopped moving. Those nights were lessons more than dinners. Strength was not in money or status. Strength was in showing up, no matter how tired, no matter how invisible. I carried her voice with me, long after those kitchens closed. When the world laughed, when doors shut, I heard her again. Stand tall. It wasn't a story of comfort. It was a story of survival. And survival was the seed of everything I would become. There was a faded photograph on the wall of our small living room. My mother's smile was soft, her eyes bright, frozen in a moment I could never step into. She died before I was old enough to remember her voice. What I knew of her came from stories whispered by Grandma Clara while she worked. I used to sit beneath that picture at night, staring until the details blurred. The frame was chipped, the colors fading, but it held more power than anything else in that house. To me, it wasn't just a picture. It was proof that love and loss could live in the same place. Grandma would catch me looking and remind me, "Naomi, strength runs in your blood. Your mama had it. Now it's yours." Those words sank deeper than any comfort. They were not meant to soothe. They were meant to prepare. I learned early that absence can teach as much as presence. My mother's absence taught me to cling tighter to the lessons of resilience, to find courage even in emptiness. That photograph stayed with me through every hardship. It was my silent anchor, reminding me who I came from and who I had to become. By the time I was 19, my life was a rotation of jobs stitched together by exhaustion. In the mornings, I tutored kids from my neighborhood who struggled with reading and math. Their parents could barely afford it, but I charged little because I remembered what it felt like to fall behind. In the afternoons, I stood behind the counter at a small Cajun diner. The air was thick with spice and smoke. I carried plates heavier than my arms wanted to hold, smiling at strangers who barely looked at me. Every tip, no matter how small, went into a jar I kept hidden in my drawer. At night, I worked in the bookstore on campus. The shelves smelled of dust and paper. Between customers, I read law texts under the dim light, fighting sleep with every page. Most days ended with aching feet and eyes too tired to focus, but I refused to ask anyone for help, not even my father. I wanted to know that every dollar of tuition came from my own hands. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. But those long days carved a strength in me that no classroom could teach. Hardship was my teacher, persistence my only grade. It was a rainy night on campus, the kind where the sky felt heavy and the streets emptied fast. I ducked into the library, shaking off water from my jacket, the sound of raindrops drumming against the tall windows. The place was almost empty. Only one other student sat nearby, a young man with sandy hair bent over a pile of books. He glanced up. Our eyes met, just for a second. His expression wasn't mocking, not curious, just gentle. It caught me off guard. A few minutes later, he walked over, voice uncertain but warm. "Looks like we're the only ones braving the storm. Want some coffee?" I studied him, waiting for the judgment I had grown used to, but it never came. His smile was nervous, not arrogant. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen rather than measured. That night, the rain kept falling, but the room felt brighter. Hope, small and unfamiliar, flickered to life. It was the beginning of a story I never thought would be mine. He returned a few minutes later, holding out a steaming paper cup. "Here," he said. "Black, no sugar. You looked like you needed it." I raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you so sure?" He shrugged, awkward but sincere. "Just a guess." Before taking the cup, I gave him a challenge. "Say my last name. If you get it right, I'll accept." He hesitated, lips forming carefully. "Ellis, right?" I nodded slowly, pretending to be stern, then let out a laugh I hadn't felt in months. The sound surprised even me. He laughed too, shaking his head. "That was cruel. You set me up." For a brief moment, the storm outside didn't matter. The library felt less like a shelter and more like a meeting place written into my story. That night, it wasn't about coffee. It was about a small gesture, a kind word, the rare feeling of being noticed without judgment. In that quiet corner, with the laughter still hanging between us, something fragile but real began to take root. On my walk back to the dorm, the rain had slowed to a mist, the kind that clings to your skin but feels almost gentle. My thoughts kept circling around the boy from the library, the one with the nervous smile and the steady eyes. "He's different," I told myself. He didn't look through me. He didn't measure me. He just saw me. It was such a simple thing, yet it felt like light breaking through a crack in a dark room. I had spent so long proving, fighting, working 3 jobs just to stand on my own. I had grown used to stares that weighed me down, but his gaze felt lighter. I wasn't foolish enough to call it love. It was only a spark, a moment. Still, it reminded me of something I thought I'd lost: hope. Maybe, I thought, there could be more to my story than survival. Maybe there was room for something softer. For the first time in years, I let myself believe that being seen for who I was could be enough. The first time Daniel invited me to one of his family's charity galas, I thought maybe things were changing. The hall was glowing, filled with laughter, crystal glasses, and the kind of elegance I had only seen in magazines. I adjusted my dress, nervous but hopeful. When I reached the entrance, a guard stepped forward, blocking my way. His eyes swept over me from head to toe, then he said flatly, "Staff should use the side door." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My ticket shook in my hand as I tried to explain, "I'm a guest." But he didn't move. He looked at me the way people look at someone out of place. It wasn't until Daniel appeared and waved me through that the guard stepped aside, muttering an apology that meant nothing. I walked in, but the sting clung to me like the perfume in the air. Inside, the music played and people smiled, but I couldn't shake the echo of his words. That night reminded me of a truth I had tried to ignore. No matter how close I stood to Daniel, some doors were never meant to open easily for me. When we finally walked inside, I expected to be seated near Daniel and his family. Instead, an usher led me past the glittering tables at the center of the room and stopped at one pushed against the far wall. The light above was dimmer there, colder, as if even the chandeliers refused to shine on me. From my seat, I could see everything: the main table glowing with silverware, the guests leaning close, laughing easily, their voices blending with the music. But from where I sat, the sound felt distant, hollow. Every so often someone's eyes flicked my way, quick and dismissive, as if wondering why I was there at all. No one joined me. No one asked if I wanted to move. It was clear enough. I wasn't part of their circle. I straightened my back, remembering Grandma's voice in that hot kitchen years ago, "Stand tall." Still, a knot settled in my chest. That night I realized some walls aren't built with bricks. They're built with glances, with silence, with the empty space between their table and mine. I tried to focus on the music, on the flicker of candles, on anything that would quiet the ache of sitting alone. Then it happened. A man in a tuxedo, glass raised, walked past and stopped at my table. Without looking twice, he held the stem toward me. "Refill, please." The words hit harder than the clink of crystal. For a moment I couldn't move. My hands stayed folded in my lap, my throat tight. He thought I was there to serve, not to belong. When he finally noticed my silence, his face flushed, but he didn't apologize. He just laughed awkwardly and walked away, leaving the insult hanging heavy in the air. I forced my shoulders back, but inside I crumbled. That one small moment carried the weight of every unspoken judgment in the room. Tell me, have you ever been in a place where people looked right through you, where your presence was treated like a mistake? If you know that feeling, then you know what that glass of wine really meant. It wasn't about a drink, it was about dignity, and how quickly they tried to take it from me. Dinner at the Whitmore estate was served on plates that looked too expensive to touch. The table stretched longer than any I had ever seen, covered in crystal and polished silver. I sat beside Daniel trying to steady my breathing when his mother Margaret leaned forward. Her smile was polite, but her eyes told the truth. "So, Naomi," she said, voice smooth, "I hear you're studying community law. Do you really believe such things change anything?" The question wasn't curiosity. It was a challenge, wrapped in silk and sharpened like a blade. Round the table, forks paused. A few guests exchanged quiet smirks, waiting for me to stumble. I met her gaze. My chest tightened, but I refused to lower my eyes. "Change begins where people are willing to fight for it," I said. Her smile didn't move, but I could feel the dismissal in her silence. For her, my words were nothing more than a child's dream. That night, I understood. To the Whitmores, my education was not a path upward. It was entertainment, something they could laugh at over their next glass of wine. The words from Margaret still echoed, sharp and deliberate. I waited for Daniel to speak, to say something, anything, that might soften the sting. But he didn't. He shifted in his chair, staring down at his plate, his fork tracing the rim in small circles. Around us, laughter picked up again, the kind that floats over the table when people think the conversation is finished. Margaret smirked, satisfied. I looked at him, searching his face for the man who once made me laugh in a quiet library. But all I saw was silence. Silence that agreed with them more than it ever stood with me. That hurt more than Margaret's words. Strangers could dismiss me, but Daniel's stillness felt like betrayal. It told me I was on my own, even with him beside me. Have you ever realized someone you love won't stand up for you? It's a crack that doesn't break all at once, but the sound of it stays with you forever. That night, I heard the first crack in us, clear as glass, shattering in my chest. A few weeks later, I sat in a clinic exam room, my hands folded tight in my lap. I had been feeling sharp pains in my chest, but the doctor barely looked at me. He tapped at his chart, eyes fixed anywhere but mine. "It's probably just stress," he said quickly, already reaching for the door. "Nothing to worry about." I wanted to argue, to tell him I knew my own body, but the words stuck in my throat. I had seen this before, my pain dismissed, my voice made small. Before he could leave, another doctor stepped inside. She was a black woman, calm and steady, with a presence that filled the room. She glanced at me, then back at him. "You need to listen to your patient," she said firmly. "She knows what she's feeling." The silence that followed was heavy. For once, he stopped moving. He listened. That moment reminded me of something I couldn't forget. Even the right to be heard, the right to be cared for, was not given freely. It had to be demanded, protected, fought for, and sometimes it took another woman like me to make the fight possible. Christmas at the Whitmore house looked like something out of a magazine. The tree sparkled in the corner, the table glowed with silver cutlery, and laughter rolled through the room like music. Every seat was filled, except one. The chair beside Daniel, clearly mine, sat untouched. A plate was set, napkin folded neat, but no one pulled it out for me. They went on talking, eating, passing dishes across the table as if the space didn't exist. I stood there for a moment, frozen. That empty chair wasn't an accident. It was a message, a reminder that no matter the ring on my finger, I would never sit comfortably at their table. I forced a smile and took the seat anyway, but the laughter didn't pause to welcome me. It rose higher, wrapping around me like a wall I couldn't climb. It was just one chair, one quiet gesture, but it carried more weight than all their words. Sometimes rejection doesn't come with insults. Sometimes it comes with silence, with the space they leave beside the man you love, wide enough to remind you that you don't belong. One evening, I walked through the Whitmore living room on my way to the kitchen when I heard voices carrying from the corner. Daniel's friends sat with glasses of wine, their laughter low but sharp. "It's a shame," one of them whispered. "Daniel could have married someone that matched his family's status." Another chuckled, not bothering to lower his voice. "Yeah, you don't build a future with someone like her, not in our circle." My chest tightened. I froze in place, too close to pretend I hadn't heard, too far to defend myself without looking desperate. I kept walking, eyes forward, pretending their words didn't reach me. But every syllable sank deep, cutting harder than if they had said it to my face. Because, truthfully, they weren't just speaking about me. They were speaking about what I represented, where I came from, what I looked like, what they believed I could never be. Tell me, have you ever smiled in public while your heart broke in silence? That night, I mastered that art, and with each step, their laughter trailed behind me, heavy as chains I couldn't shake. Late one evening, I stood in front of the mirror in Daniel's house, a dress zipped tight against my skin. It shimmered under the light, elegant and heavy, nothing like the clothes I once wore in that small New Orleans kitchen. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her hair was polished, her shoulders bare, her hands trembling at her sides. I reached for the necklace my grandmother had left me, the one I wore almost every day. A simple chain, old but full of memory. Slowly, I unclasped it and set it down. The mirror reflected someone new, someone wealthier, shinier, but emptier, too. I searched her face, wondering if she had any of the grit I once carried, the girl who worked 3 jobs and kept her head high no matter the insult. I whispered to my reflection, barely audible, "Who are you becoming?" In that silence, I felt the weight of every compromise I'd made. The dress fit perfectly, but in that moment, I never felt more out of place in my own skin. One afternoon, Margaret called me into the sitting room. Her voice was calm, almost sweet, but her eyes stayed cold. She set down her teacup, folded her hands, and said, "Before you and Daniel think about children, it would be wise to have genetic testing done, just to be sure." I froze. "Be sure of what?" I asked, though I already knew. Her lips curved into a practiced smile. "Well, you understand. Families like ours have to be careful about surprises." The words sank into me like ice water. My heart pounded as I looked straight at her. "Is that your way of saying you don't want my children to look like me?" The silence stretched. She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. The pause said more than her words ever could. I walked out of that room with my chest tight, but my back unbent. That moment told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just questioning my worth. They were questioning the right for my future children to even exist as they are. One night I was sorting case files at our small dining table when Daniel walked in. He leaned against the doorway, watching me for a while before speaking. "Naomi, you should quit," he said softly. "Let me take care of you." At first, it almost sounded like love, but underneath his tone I heard something else. The same echo I had heard around his family's table. A quiet judgment, a subtle demand. I set my pen down, staring at him. "Why?" I asked. He smiled faintly, as if it was simple. "You don't have to work so hard. It's not necessary." But, for me, it was necessary. My work wasn't just a paycheck. It was proof I could stand on my own, that I wasn't defined by their wealth or their rules. In that moment, I realized the battle wasn't only outside with his family. It was seeping into our marriage, changing his voice, shaping his choices. The man who once admired my strength was now asking me to set it aside. And I couldn't help but wonder, was that his love speaking, or his family's shadow through him? It was a Monday morning like any other. My desk was stacked with case files, the office buzzing with phones and footsteps. Then the room shifted when Daniel walked in unannounced. His face was hard, his steps deliberate. Without a greeting, he placed a stack of papers on my desk. "Divorce papers," he said, his voice carrying enough weight for everyone around to hear. "And don't think I'm paying alimony to someone who only married me for money." Gasps rippled through the office. A few coworkers lowered their eyes, pretending not to watch, but the silence told me they all heard. I stared at the papers, my fingers cold, my heart pounding. For a moment I thought of arguing, of defending myself, but then I saw the certainty in his eyes, the satisfaction of repeating his family's lies as if they were truth. So I pushed the papers back across the desk without a word. Inside I was breaking. But outside I refused to let them see me beg. That day, Daniel didn't just end our marriage, he tried to end my dignity. And I swore I would not give him that victory. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, a place where truth was supposed to matter. Daniel sat tall beside his lawyer, his voice steady as he read from the list in front of him. The trust fund, the condo on Fifth, the stocks, my stake in Whitmore Industries. Each word rolled out like a drumbeat of wealth, echoing off the walls. With every item, Margaret's smile grew wider, her chin lifted higher. She leaned closer to him when he finished, whispering just loud enough, "Good boy." The words weren't affection. They were pride in the empire they thought defined them. Around us, murmurs spread, heads nodding, pens scribbling, as if his assets were proof of character. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, letting them revel in their performance. For them, this was a moment of triumph, the proof that their world was unshakable. But deep down, I felt a shift, like the silence before a storm. They believed the stage belonged to them. They had no idea the script was about to change. When the judge turned to me, the air in the courtroom felt heavier, expectant. Her voice was calm. "Mrs. Ellis, please state your assets for the record." I lifted my chin, my voice steady. "For disclosure purposes, my father is Victor Ellis, founder of Ellis Healthcare and Ellis Real Estate Holdings." For a beat, the room didn't react. Then the silence deepened, sharp as glass. A pen slipped from someone's hand. Chairs creaked as heads turned. Even the court reporter paused mid-typing. Margaret's smile froze, caught between disbelief and dread. Daniel blinked, his confident posture unraveling as his lawyer shifted uneasily in his seat. The judge raised her brows. "Victor Ellis? The Ellis who owns the hospital network?" "Yes, Your Honor," I answered simply. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. One name had shifted the ground beneath them, unraveling the narrative they had so carefully spun. For years, they treated me as nothing. In one sentence, I reminded them that their arrogance had been built on assumptions, and assumptions can shatter with a single truth. The moment hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. Then, click. Cameras from the back of the courtroom flashed, capturing every face as the truth settled like a stone. Margaret's skin drained of color, her lips parted but no words came. The proud tilt of her chin collapsed into disbelief. She clutched her pearls as if they could shield her from reality. Beside her, Robert leaned back hard, fumbling for his phone, his thumb tapping frantically as though Google could undo what he had just heard. And Daniel, his hands trembled against the table. The same hands that had once slipped a ring onto mine now tightened until his knuckles went white. His smirk, once unshakable, had vanished. In its place was raw panic. Murmurs rippled through the room, a chorus of whispers rising louder than laughter ever had. The Whitmores had strutted in certain of their victory. But now, under the weight of a single name, their empire of arrogance was cracking piece by piece in front of everyone watching. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with reporters and flashing cameras. That's when Margaret's voice cut through, suddenly dripping with honey. "Sweetheart, this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. We should talk, maybe even start fresh." Robert reached for my hand, his tone warm, practiced. "Your father and I should meet sometime. I've always admired his work in healthcare." And Daniel, his eyes wide, his voice desperate, stammered, "Naomi, if I had known who your father was—" I stopped him cold. "Exactly. If you had known, not if you had cared." The words landed heavier than any gavel. Their fake smiles faltered, slipping into silence. For years, they judged me as less, dismissed me as unworthy. And now, they scrambled to rewrite the story, not because they saw my value, but because they saw his. I looked at them one last time and said, "You never wanted me. You only wanted what my last name could give you." And with that, I turned away, refusing to carry their shadow any longer. A week later, there were no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations, just an email, short, direct, and final. "After review, Ellis Properties will not be renewing Whitmore Construction's lease, effective at the end of the current term." Victor read it over once more, then clicked send. That was it. No speeches, no revenge monologue, just business. But the weight of those words was heavier than any outburst could ever be. That lease was the crown jewel of their image, the address they bragged about at galas, the building that carried their name across the city skyline. Without it, they weren't just losing office space. They were losing status. I imagined Margaret opening that email, her hands shaking as she realized the empire she lorded over me was slipping through her fingers. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it was quiet, clean, unstoppable. And in that silence, the Whitmores finally felt the cost of every cruel word they had ever thrown my way. The red ribbon stretched across the doorway, the gold letters above gleaming in the sun. Ellis Legal Aid Center. My hands held the scissors steady, but my heart raced. When the ribbon fell, the crowd erupted in applause. Neighbors I had grown up with, teachers who once encouraged me, even kids from the diner where I worked. Everyone was there. Their smiles were brighter than any chandelier in the Whitmore estate. Mrs. Alvarez, who had fought eviction, hugged me tight. "You did this, Naomi. For all of us." I looked around and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not because of my last name, not because of money, but because of the work I had built with my own hands. This wasn't just an office. It was a promise. A place where people who had been ignored, dismissed, or silenced would finally be heard. For the first time, I realized my fight had never been about sitting at their table. It was about building my own and making room for others to sit beside me. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe in New Orleans, 2 cups of coffee cooling between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then my father finally said, almost in a whisper, "I'm sorry, Naomi, for the years I wasn't there, for everything I missed." His voice cracked, and I saw the man not as the powerful Victor Ellis, but as a father carrying regret. I took a breath. "I built my life without you," I admitted, steady but soft. "But that doesn't mean I can't let you back in." His shoulders eased, a small smile breaking through the years of distance. We didn't talk about money or business. We talked about Sunday dinners at Grandma Clara's, about the way Mom used to laugh until she cried, about the pieces of our lives that had been waiting to be shared. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was a start, and sometimes that's all a family needs. One late night, while sorting through old papers in my kitchen, I found an envelope tucked inside Grandma Clara's worn cookbook. Her handwriting, shaky but familiar, stretched across the front. For Naomi. I unfolded the letter, and her words reached across time. "Never dim your light, no matter how hard the world tries. The right people will see you for who you are, not what you have." Tears blurred the page. Not from sadness, but from recognition. For years, I had tried to shrink myself to fit into rooms that never wanted me there. I had traded laughter for silence, strength for survival, dignity for a chance at their approval. But Grandma had known. She had seen the battles I would face before I even lived them. Her voice was gone, but her wisdom had always been here, waiting. I pressed the letter to my chest, whispering, "I hear you, Grandma. I won't hide anymore." In that moment, the fight wasn't about revenge or even respect. It was about living fully, proudly, as the woman she raised me to be. One Saturday morning, a little girl from down the block knocked on my office door. She carried a stack of library books almost bigger than her arms. Her smile reminded me of myself at that age, hungry to learn, but already aware of how the world could make you feel small. I reached into my bag and pulled out the necklace Grandma Clara had given me, the same one I used to wear during my hardest nights, a reminder of strength when I felt invisible. I knelt down and placed it gently in her hands. "This isn't about jewelry," I told her softly. "It's about remembering who you are, even when people try to make you forget." Her eyes widened, not at the shine, but at the weight of the moment. She nodded, clutching it tight, as if she already understood. Watching her, I realized the necklace had done its job for me. Now it was meant to guide someone else. That day, I didn't just pass down a keepsake. I passed down the promise that no girl on my street would ever have to walk alone in her light. I stood before a group of young women at the new community center. Some were students, some were single mothers. All of them carried that same question in their eyes. Will there ever be space for me? I smiled, steady and sure. If there isn't a seat at their table, I told them, then build your own table and make it long enough for every sister to sit with you. The room grew quiet, then a ripple of nods spread like a wave, and a few wiped their eyes. Others clutched notebooks as if the words were something they didn't want to forget. I thought about every empty chair I had faced, every whispered insult, every wall that tried to shut me out, and in that moment I knew none of it had been in vain, because my story wasn't just mine. It was a torch, and now it was lighting theirs. Would you have the courage to build your own table, even if theirs stays closed? If you've ever been laughed at, dismissed, or treated like you didn't belong, I want you to hear this. You are not alone. I was there once, and I chose to rise. So if you've ever been underestimated, write it in the comments. I rise. Say it for yourself, not for anyone else. Because every time we claim those words, we take back our dignity. And if you want to keep walking this journey with me, through the pain, the victories, and the hope, follow along. This is only the beginning. Together, we rise higher.